This is Sultan Hatoum from Abu Dhabi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I have with me today Mo Farzadi and Kabir Dawan from PwC to talk about practical responses to the business disruption of COVID-19. Before starting, I would like to bring into your attention that you can attend the session in Arabic via the link that the team will share in the chat box, and that you can share your questions via the Q&A section where Mo and Kabir will try to cover during the last 50 minutes of the session. For those of you who are attending the program for the first time, please note that all of Chamber Talk sessions are recorded and can be seen on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Going back to our topic, although there are still quite very difficult questions to find answers for, and yet lot of uncertainties around the shape of recovery, whether it's going to be a V-shape, U-shape, or an L-shape, I believe that by now we are all deeply aware of where we are and what's our position. Despite of the potential rise of second wave, I would say, in some areas of the world, as we have seen in the sharp rise of new cases in the States, for example. Also, no one would argue that during the last past couple of months, businesses have been responsive to the pandemic and have actually been setting the stage for preparing to the recovery phase and positioning for the thriving phase, which might be just around the corner. Fingers crossed, of course. We hope that in today's session, we'll be able to shed more light on different actions that businesses can take to help them navigate the recent disruption that have created serious issues for companies of all sizes and types across a wide range of sectors and have put unanticipated pressure on their working capital lines and liquidity. It's obvious that the pandemic has changed the standard norms of doing business. It has changed the baselines for setting forecasts and plannings for the future. Normal routine planning are no longer enough to take decisions. We have seen many businesses reassessing their current positions and resetting priorities, identifying core versus non-core businesses to probably divest ones that are not strategic or loss-making in order to generate cash to sustain or invest in potential new opportunities. Scenario planning for the short, medium, and long terms is not anymore an option for all businesses in order to avoid surprises and respond properly. It is vital that you understand how you'll conduct business in a post-COVID era and accordingly adjust your operating models to the new normal. There are many quick wins and low-hanging fruits that businesses can exploit to survive. We are talking about enhancements to your working capital management and optimization, inventory and supply chain management, fixed versus variable costs, critical versus non-critical projects and initiatives, basically which has to continue and which should be deferred. We are also referring to governance, optimal operational and organizational structures, strengthening balance sheet positions, and leveraging sources of financial support based on availability of headroom and assets available for pledging. In a nutshell, it's not only about surviving for the next couple of months, but it's more about preparing for the future via investing in technology and in relationships, whether it be your people, clients, or suppliers. And yes, it's about mindfully preserving cash, which has proved to be king. The panel from PwC will start by highlighting some insights from PwC's COVID-19 Middle East CFO Pulse Survey, followed by a rapid assessment of the current financial position and a three-step approach to managing cash, aligned with specific actions corporates are taking now, and will end by addressing key critical success factors of an effective cash forecast and actions that should be considered in the short and medium terms. A brief introduction about Mo and Kabir before I pass it to Mo. Mo is a partner and business restructuring leader at PwC. He has extensive experience in financial reviews, debt refinancing and restructuring, and deals-based advisory services. He is currently based in Dubai and has experience of working in the UK and Europe. Throughout his career, Mo has advised a range of UK, European, international, and Middle Eastern lenders, corporates, and GREs. Our second speaker for the day, Kabir, is a senior manager in business restructuring practice at PwC. He has over 12 years of experience in change management, cost reduction, and restructuring across multiple sectors. Kabir has extensive experience with listed FTSE 500 and FTSE 250 and private businesses and has worked across 3 continents. That's amazing. I will pass it now to Mo to start the presentation.
Thank you, Sultan. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're dialing in from to the audience. So I'm going to run through a short presentation with regards to what we're seeing in the region and our experience of some practical steps that businesses should think about taking if they're not already taking in the context of COVID-19 and the challenges being faced in the market. Sultan has already made an introduction for us, so I'll skip over this one. And before I go into the practical steps and the meat of the presentation, I wanted to set the scene. And I'm going to do that by running through some of the key messages that has come out of PwC's CFO survey, very recent CFO survey, focused on COVID-19. We've been running these on a regular basis over the last few months. So first of all, one of the questions that was asked from a number of CFOs globally and in the Middle East was what is their key concern with respect to COVID? It's not surprising to hear that Middle Eastern CFOs, as well as global all territory CFOs and the ones in the UAE and KSA, are very much concerned around the financial impact of COVID-19 on their business as probably the first answer that had the highest hit, followed by a potential global recession. So there clearly are challenges and concerns on the mindset of the C-suite, which again should not be a surprise to the audience. One of the other questions we asked the CFOs when we were interviewing them with regards to this survey was what would be the impact that they would expect on the company's revenue and profitability this year as a result of COVID-19. 89% of Middle East CFOs expect their profits and revenues to decrease. Again, that should not be surprising. And 1 in 10 are now expecting to decrease to be below 50%. The vast majority thought that the impact of COVID-19 on their business would be probably somewhere in the region of 10 to 25%. Again, these are big numbers. 10% reduction in your revenue and profitability could have a huge impact on your headrooms, on your facilities, on your cash availability. So these are some stark messages. And finally, we asked the CFOs what actions are they considering to take in response to COVID-19. And Middle Eastern CFOs are looking to cut costs and most likely to consider cost containment and deferral or cancellation of planned investments. Again, that should not come as a surprise. If your revenues are dropping anywhere between 10 to 50%, then you need to really manage your liquidity and cash position, and the means that you have to go and invest are reduced. Therefore, pausing investments or stopping them is one. 2, and we will talk about that later on in this presentation. The other thing is reducing costs. So again, this sets the scene in the context of what certain C-suite and based on our interviews and surveys are seen as challenges and the actions that they are thinking about. I'm going to run through a few slides here in terms of some practical steps that businesses should think about in the context of COVID-19 and the challenging environment out there. One of the things we recommend our clients to do is a rapid financial assessment of the financial position of the corporate or the group. We put those into 3 buckets: cash, funding flexibility, contingency plans, and then stakeholder management. I'm going to run through each of those one by one. And again, please, if you have any questions, put it in the chat box or we can take them at the end of this presentation. From a cash perspective, as Sultan rightly highlighted, cash today is king. We do not recommend our clients to consider profitability in today's environment. And in the short term, you need to keep an eye on your cash flows more than you do on your revenues and your P&L. Short-term cash flow forecasting and creation of one, if you don't have one, is critical and something that you need to build and develop very quickly. That gives you the visibility over the next few weeks and months in terms of what liquidity position you have, where are the pitfalls and where are the pinch points, and what tools you have to be able to move those pinch points in order to get through the difficult times. Updating your business plans, budget, and forecasts, both in terms of the next few weeks and months and beyond. It is really important to really understand the impact of what's happened out there, both in the short term and in the medium and long term, and then have discussions with your stakeholders, which I'll come to in a second, either your shareholders or your lenders and financiers. Performing sensitivity analysis. My clients sometimes ask me, well, how do I know what's going to happen to my business? I don't have a crystal ball. My response is nobody does. However, in order to try and actually understand what the potential impact of certain assumptions or movements are, you need to run scenarios. There is no harm in running more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scenarios. Run as many as you like, and then you can work out what the impact of different changes in assumptions will be on your business. And then identifying worst case scenarios. What would happen in those scenario analysis that you've done in the worst case, your best estimate of the worst case, and what tools you have and what mitigating actions you have and hold in order to avoid a worst case. One thing is running the scenario. The other thing is actually coming up with the actions that you need to take as a management and as business owners and representatives to mitigate any of these pitfalls. Secondly is around funding flexibility and capacity. Additional borrowing facilities to the extent available to you. We recommend that you draw down on your facilities, take over, have conversations with your lenders as early as possible, and to try and ensure that you have sufficient headroom in the facilities to get through the next few weeks and months. Flexibility on banking covenants and cures. Do you have any banking covenants that are upcoming and are likely to be breached because you don't have sufficient facilities, sufficient headroom, or your performance of the business is reduced? You need to know those early on so that you can have earlier conversations with your lenders as soon as possible. And scope for accessing government funding initiatives. Again, this has been an area of a lot of interest, understandably. Governments globally and also regionally have been providing stimulus packages, and we do recommend that you consider these in the context of your business and seeing if you have got ability to access these. If so, please apply and access those, because that's one mean of ensuring that you have sufficient headroom and availability of headroom to get through the next few months. Contingency planning. Again, assessing levels of tactical cost reduction, which Kabir will cover in more detail later on. It is really important to look at and think, one thing is external, so what can my shareholders, what can my bankers provide me with support? The other thing is what's in your control. You have got control over your costs, cost reduction, cost containment, managing your working capital. These are things that are in your means in order to be able to control and change these levers to ensure that you are living and you are able to survive in a meaningful way over the next few months. Developing an operational contingency plan in order to minimize business disruption. So this is around supply chain. This is around being able to ensure that your business is not disrupted over the coming weeks and months. And finally, and very importantly, people always forget this bucket, stakeholder management. You could be doing the first three, and if you don't communicate and people don't know, first of all, that you are taking these actions or unaware of the actions you're taking, or if you're late in communicating, this is a huge pitfall for businesses. So as an example, if you're taking certain actions and haven't communicated to your lenders, then there's a possibility that the lenders may take certain actions, but if they were aware of what actions you are taking, they may be open to discussions and conversations and providing flexibility. So it's really important for you to engage early with your stakeholders. This is your lenders, your customers, your suppliers, and your shareholders, in order to ensure those channels of communications are open and everybody is aware in a full transparent manner as to what the impact on the business is and what actions are being taken. The three-step approach for managing cash is really critical in the current times. As I said, you need to rapidly understand the current financial position of your business. You need to take actions to mitigate and protect the position, mitigate challenges and protect the position, and manage internal and external stakeholders. Some specific actions that we ask corporates or we advise corporates to take, and some are already taking. One, assessing and looking at your drawdown of available facilities in your banking facilities. If you have headroom, we recommend you draw that down. There might be costs associated with it because you're drawing down on a working capital facility, on an overdraft facility, but that cost is worthwhile for you to have the headroom and availability of that cash. So we recommend you draw down on your facilities if they're available as soon as possible. You need to rapidly assess government and support initiatives, which I discussed earlier, and see if there's any flexibility or ability for you guys to take advantage of those. Rapidly assess the impact of countrywide restrictions on your forecast revenues. This is around scenario analysis and impact on your business. Looking at cash burn rates. So understanding what is your cash burn and how much headroom you have, and then understanding how much time you have to get through the level of headroom you have within your business. And finally, to bring it all together, we do recommend that you put in place what we call a war room. That's not just a finance-driven war room. That will be finance, operations, sales, marketing. Everybody would meet on a regular basis, we would say weekly, to sit down and go through, first of all, the impact on the business from a numbers perspective, from an operational perspective, from a sales perspective. This is usually chaired by somebody senior, like a CFO, COO, or CEO, and then there are actions that are then agreed upon for individuals in the meeting who report on a weekly basis. So effectively a war room set up to ensure that all the initiatives are actioned by the various committee members, and also it has full senior support within the organization. I'm going to cover some critical success factors of an effective cash flow forecast, and these are really, really important when you are preparing or developing or improving your cash flow forecast. You need to set clear objectives. Objectives of a cash flow forecast need to be agreed by the people who are developing it and people who are inputting into it. So setting clear objectives is a step one and ensuring that everyone's aligned. You need to ensure the methodology is right. Are you doing a receipts and payments? Is it just simply cash in minus cash out equals your net, and then plus or minus your opening balance? Is that the case? Or are you thinking about a P&L-driven cash flow forecast? So methodology is really important, and you need to get buy-in from all of the people that are involved in inputting and driving the forecast. It is important to ensure that you've got information that's available and it's reliable. So IT actually plays a big part in coming up with cash flow forecasts. So again, if you're able to get your IT department to run reports of the position with regards to cash forecasts or the data that's available today in terms of your, let's say, opening position, that's really important. Sometimes we use certain tools such as Power BI and other tools that are available that you can just plug into your IT system, and it really throws out the cash flow forecast. If you've got the means to do that because it'll be less labor intensive and more accurate. Training is really important. I think until a crisis point, most businesses and people are really not focused on cash. Everybody really focuses on profitability. So really training your staff and your team members to ensure that they understand what this means and why it's so important is a critical aspect for a successful cash flow forecast. And again, finally, it's a culture change, cash culture rather than a profit culture. We do recommend that businesses consider changing some of the KPIs if they don't have it already, and flexing that so that it has cash-related KPIs rather than purely profit performance-related KPIs for the management team. This is important because it changes the mindset and culture of the organization to be more focused on cash rather than pure profitability. So again, effective cash flow forecasting is important. These are some of the critical success factors that we've seen, some tools. There are different ways of doing a cash flow forecast. You can do it based on a receipts and payments, based on a P&L. I think if you agree the principles upfront with the organization, with the finance team, finance usually is the driver behind and the conduit in bringing it all together, but the inputs are primarily from operations, from the various business units, and people who are really hands-on. A number of my clients usually ask me, how are the banks acting in the current climate? What are they doing? Are they supportive? Are they not supportive? Are they ensuring that we have got sufficient facilities? Are they being aggressive? So I wanted to really highlight some of the key things that we're saying in the market in the context of the banks and their behaviors, and some of the questions that they're asking the clients. I think this is important. It's important to highlight that banks' processes and priorities have changed. Just like your business's process and priorities changed, the banks there's been a change in attitude and the processes. Things are just taking longer and everything is being delayed. If you've got approvals you're waiting for, factor more time for the bank to give you those approvals. Banks are prioritizing existing clients with track records. So if you're existing client of a bank with track record, you're in a much better position than a new client. That's understandable because again, they are trying to mitigate risk from their organization's perspective. As I said, there are delays in approvals due to COVID, so factor sufficient times, and stimulus packaging facilities are processing of borrower requests again are being done. I looked at a recent chart in regards to the banks in the UAE and how much of the government stimulus packages that are being used up by the banks, and nearly in all cases, 100% of these packages are already being used by the banks. So I think the banks have already used and absorbed the stimulus packages. What does that mean for you is if you managed to take benefit and advantage of these stimulus packages, fantastic. And the delays that you've been able to achieve in regards to your principles, if they are coming up over the next few weeks and months, you need to start planning for those discussions, because I can guarantee you those discussions and conversations are not going to be as easy as the ones that you might have had in March or June, because the banks have already utilized what was available to them from a stimulus package perspective. Now, perhaps the government will provide additional stimulus packages, but today that's unclear. Therefore, after recommendation is plan for discussions with your lenders, because discussions over time are going to become more and more challenging. New money propositions are deprioritized. If there's a need for new money within your organization from banks, it is likely that these are going to be more challenging conversations than they were before. Banks are not, the appetite for new money has reduced. Security and structural features are important. So if you've got assets that are available or cash flows that are available for provision of security, this will make the conversation easier. However, if your assets or cash flows are already pledged to banks, then the conversations may become a lot more difficult. So if you've got security or means to provide security, that will again provide much more flexibility. Some of the questions the banking sector is asking corporates at the moment, and these are really important, you should highlight these in terms of when you're thinking about your discussions and dialogue with lenders, is which business in your group have been affected relatively more by COVID? So where are the kind of pain points? Tell us about them. What is the current view on the near-term cash flow? Again, we covered cash flow. Every banking conversation you have today will have some element of cash flow forecasting or visibility. They will always ask for this. What does it look like for the next 3 months? What does it look like for the next 6 months? Based on your internal strength. How is the group expected to reposition its business portfolio in the medium term? So if you've got sufficient cash over the next 3 to 6 months, what does that mean then going forward? What does next year look like? What does FY21 and beyond look like? Have you done some scenario analysis? Tell us about this. What operational cash flow management steps have you taken in order to respond to COVID? What are you doing yourself? If you're coming to ask us for help, what have you done before you come in to ask for help? We are happy to help, but you need to have taken actions yourselves and tell us what you've done and how they've been effective or ineffective, and we'll provide you with some support as well. And how are the sponsors looking to support? So what are your shareholders doing? Are the equity holders also providing some equity and some leeway, or have they just sat, behind and saying, go and ask the banks for support? So again, if you went to a conversation with a lender, prepared with the following: one, you have information, cash flow forecast, scenario analysis, business plan. Two, you've provided and proven to them that you've taken certain actions. You reduce costs, you've deferred bonuses, you have improved your working capital. And you have number three, your shareholders saying, we're willing to support, but we've only got means to support up to a certain level, and that's not sufficient. If you go with that kind of package and mindset, I guarantee you that the conversation will be, I can't guarantee you'll get what you want, but I can guarantee you the conversation will be a lot more easier and smoother and more effective, and banks are likely to be a lot more open to listening to you in regards to any further deferrals or any additional facilities or headrooms that you may require. On that note, I'm going to pause and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kabir, who's going to cover some of the other practical steps, really the things that you have in your control, because this is important. What's in your control is really important. And he will give you some practical steps of things that you need to think about. Over to you, Kabir.
Thank you, Mo. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about some of the short-term, medium-term, and then longer-term initiatives that you can consider, all of which will make an impact on your cost base and also improve your cash burn rate. Because you can control a lot of these items, they're usually a little bit easier to execute on rather than things which are outside of your control. The way we like to think about this is if we break the situation into four. There was crisis management in March, April, and May. A lot of organizations were in the middle of a crisis responding to COVID-19. They were thinking about how they respond. They were thinking about business continuity. They were thinking about how they support their management and their people. And a lot of those actions have already completed. Some organizations started cash flow forecasting. Some improved what they had. Some haven't quite gotten there yet. But as you emerge from that stage where we are today, this is where most organizations need to think about short-term action. We call this the mobilized phase. And there's a few things which are really, really critical. The first is very tight control of liquidity. Liquidity and controlling this is making sure any money going out of the business is understood, tracked, and assessed in the right way. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in just a moment. We've also seen lots of organizations starting to roll out rapid cost reduction programs, thinking about how they can optimize their cost base, the things that they can do quickly, potentially around renegotiating contracts, redeploying individuals, or even potentially disposing of some smaller assets. These are all things that organizations are thinking about today for the short term. We expect the focus to then shift to the medium term. So this is where what Mo mentioned about repositioning comes in. So this is where organizations think about reshaping their business, putting people in the right place for a post-COVID environment, embedding some of the liquidity management controls for the long term. So instead of it being a process that's run now because it's a crisis, you actually convert it into something that stays going forwards, and then continuing to engage with stakeholders. And once that completes, we expect businesses to focus a bit more on the long term. So this is thinking about strategizing. So the traditional view of what should we invest in, what differentiates us, how do we continue to grow. This is the map that we use to think about action emerging from a crisis. And we'll now move to the next slide, which focuses on some of the short-term action. Mo, if you wouldn't mind, thank you. So there are many things businesses can do in the short term. We wanted to point out some very, very clear and specific ones. The first is to stand up a central point of control. This could be a war room, like Mo mentioned previously. It could be a cash control room. but this needs to be a group of individuals that can sit in the center of the organization and absolutely understand every amount of cash going in and out of the business. And that's really important because that consolidates everything in one place. And if you have that single point of visibility, you can make decisions. Some companies are in a very unfortunate situation. They need to make choices on a daily basis. Should they pay their employees? Should they pay their core suppliers? Should they buy raw materials? What should they do? And this central control room actually helps make those decisions a little bit easier because you've got the right data sitting behind it. It's very easy to say, well, we should pay employees first, and that's absolutely the right thing to think about. But you need to have the data behind it. You pay your employees, how much is left to pay everyone else? So some businesses that are in a very strained position need that. Other businesses should be considering that. We also think that cost containment is one of the priorities. So these are a number of key actions we've listed out that you can take. The first is around renewal of contracts. If you have any key supplier contracts coming up for renewal now, next month, within the next 3 months, you should have the right people around that to make sure that you're addressing cost containment when you renew it. It could be looking at very specific things, like if every year your prices go up by inflation, have you actually negotiated that? Have you had the discussion? Have you thought about changing payment terms with suppliers? Instead of paying on a 45-day basis, would they accept maybe an extra 2 weeks delay to payments? There are things that you can consider and should take advantage, particularly if you've got contract renewals coming up. The second area around cost containment that I think is very important is stopping all non-critical projects. If a project has a direct and short-term impact on cash, then great, assess it and continue with it. But if it's something that could be delayed for 6 months or 12 months or potentially cancelled altogether, you should have a framework in place to really assess these projects and understand what you stop. There are many ways of doing this. You can consider everything from cash to cost to impact on people. I think the metrics really depend on the situation, but being able to assess all the time being spent on these projects and free it up quickly is quite important. We recently did some work for a UAE-based company. They believed that they had an amount of time spent on projects. They were surprised when we did the analysis and actually showed them that 20% of their staff were working on projects at any one point. And that could be fine for the business, but their leadership team was surprised that it was so high. So we were able to work with them to rationalize that down and free up some project resource who could go on to other activities, which leads me nicely onto cost reduction teams. A lot of businesses are setting up cost reduction teams to try and identify internal cost optimization opportunities. And this is something that needs resource. If you're able to free up project resource, you can allocate it to those cost reduction teams. Finally, we'll step into cash collection capability.
Kabir, can I just step in for a second? I think if you can come a bit closer to your computer, people are having some difficulty hearing you, if that's okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you, Mo. The last area to think about is cash collection capability. In this situation, you need to be able to collect cash as quickly as you can, and some time should be spent optimizing the processes around cash collection, and even more important, redeploying staff to support that. If you have individuals that are less busy than they used to be because of COVID, maybe their roles have been impacted directly, you should consider reallocating them to support collection activity. It might be as simple as having them help pick up the phone and call to request updates on payments, but that's something that is quite critical and very, very easy to do. So if we step to the next slide, we will talk a little bit more about some of the medium-term actions around repositioning. As you move into the medium term, businesses should be thinking about what I like to think about in three different ways. What do you do as a business? Where and how do you do it? And how well do you do it? And if you can articulate your strategy coming out of COVID in this way, you can actually think about what activities you can start stopping, what services you can reduce, and how you can shift demand. Instead of activities being undertaken by people in your business, is there a way to shift some of that to your suppliers or even potentially your customers? These include things like self-service. You have the right web platforms, etc., that allow customers to engage with you rather than you doing the work for the customer. That's quite high level, but if you have that understanding, you can then actually look at where and how you do things and how well you do them. It's a good time to start thinking about outsourcing, to think about automation, to think about how you leverage third parties to reduce your cost. You can also think about simplifying your organization. A rule of thumb that we hear quite frequently is that if there's more than 7 people between your CEO and your most junior person in the organization, you may want to look at that because that sounds like a very deep organization, and there are benefits to actually taking some layers out, making it flatter. This is what we call organization simplification, and it's something that is a good thing to look at now with changes in roles and responsibilities due to COVID. Finally, you should be thinking about how well you do things. How do you maximize productivity? How do you give people the tools that they need to do more of their job with less time? Because this is a challenging environment, but equally, businesses need to be able to grow. As you come out of COVID, you would hope that growth returns, and you need to be set up to scale. So the more you can do around improving your processes, setting yourself up to scale for growth, and making sure that you can make change quickly, the better it will be. A lot of this will translate to an improved cost base and improved cash burn rate over time. But now is the time to start considering how you might approach some of this. I think those are the key slides that I was going to step through. So I will pause there and open it back up for questions, I think.
Just before we open for backup questions, I just want to find some final comments and remarks. These, what you've just heard over the last few slides, they're all relatively simple and logical ways of, managing your business and improving, the position. We should all, as business owners, should all be doing this sort of stuff anyway. But I think what happens is in the good times, as your revenues are in a better place, as cash and liquidity is not an issue, people forget to be a lot more strict in terms of some of the actions that you might be taking. Managing your costs, managing your liquidity, stuff that you should be doing on a day-to-day basis in any business. However, it becomes secondary if you've got sufficient or additional facilities and you're thinking about investment, you're thinking about growth. As there's a challenge in the market today, both locally and globally, and investment and growth and top line are being impacted by all businesses. And this goes back across all businesses. Then I think there's more focus on what you can do internally with regards to your cash, with regards to your facilities, with regards to your cost reduction and things that are in your control. And with some support from stakeholders, I'm confident that most businesses will be able to get through the difficult times. I think it's on the onus is on the the management team and business owners to take actions early on, to engage early on with stakeholders, and to communicate and ensure that all of the actions are being taken in a manner that's improving the chances of the business surviving and prospering. If businesses get through the next few weeks and months, which I'm sure a lot of them will do, and take these actions, following COVID and the challenges, it'll be a lot more of a leaner business and a lot more profitable once there's an improvement in market conditions. So on that note, Sultan, I'm going to pause and hand it over back to you to field some questions.
Yep. Thank you, Mo, and thank you, Kabir. We've received a number of questions on the English and the Arabic sessions. I'm going to start with a question from Munir. So you've referred in your presentation to short-term cash impact and that you can stop all non-critical projects. So how do you decide which are critical?
Okay, that's a good question. Kabir, do you want to take that one?
Sure, thank you. No, that is a great question. What is critical is different at different times. I think today, something that is critical is something that ensures survival of the business and improves cash in the short term. If it's not doing either of these two things, you probably shouldn't be focusing on it as much in the next couple of months as you normally would. I think your priorities are going to change. If you're in the very lucky situation where you have sufficient financing, you have sufficient cash, then you don't need to worry about it. Prioritize as you normally would, but most businesses aren't in that place. So I would say that the short answer is identify what your priority is today, and for most organizations, survival and cash, and then base it around that.
Okay, thank you, Kabir. I've received a couple of, I would say, a series of questions from Ali, around 5 or 6. It's mainly, if I want to summarize it, it's if you can provide insights on people working on the events industry. So with the social distancing in place and all of those strict measures, I would say, for the safety and security of workers. So what would be your advice for people working in the sector?
Let me start that, and Kabir, you can interject as needed. I think that's the entertainment industry is probably one of the most challenged one, given the social distancing restrictions. I've got a couple of clients who operate in that industry or have got portfolio assets that operate in that industry, and they've been extremely challenged, both here and globally. It is really difficult for anybody, for any of us, to really say that when that sector is going to be back to normal, when we're going to be able to remove restrictions on social distancing and allow people to, congregate in the same area, be it in, in a restaurant or be it in any event. So the only thing I would say, the only thing I or anyone else can tell you, unless there's someone out there with a crystal ball, is to run a scenario and work out what that means for your business in a number of different outcomes. One of my clients, they run one of their assets in the entertainment industry, and they ran 3 scenarios. Scenario 1 was September, we're back to 60% of our performance. December, we're back to 80%, and Q1 21, we're back to 100%. Now, I'm not saying that's correct for your business, but I think all you can do run a number of scenarios. What then that means to your business will depend on what you have in terms of means and facilities and support from your shareholders and your banking providers and financing providers, and how you can get through the next 3, 4, 6, 9, 10 months. But it's really difficult, if not impossible, for anyone to tell you what's going to happen. So all I would say is run a number of scenarios and then look and see what those scenarios mean for your business, and then have appropriate actions against each of those scenarios, all the way from the most optimistic down to the most pessimistic scenario. Anything you want to add to that, Kabir?
I think just an observation. In the previous months, we've seen things like events and conferences drastically change. A lot of the large American companies who, like Google or Microsoft, who would do their annual conferences and events, have actually shifted them to be completely digital. And I know it's not a reassuring answer to people that work in roles that require them to be, on the ground and at the conference. But I think there is a shift happening in terms of how some of these events are managed and delivered. I think the people in the organizations that can take advantage of that quickly are going to be the ones that are better off in the medium term.
Thank you, gents. A question from Riyadh, which I'm gonna rephrase a little bit to make it easier for you and for me to and for the audience to digest. So, given all the recommendations that you're providing, and we've had as well a couple of other sessions which had advisors provided similar advice. Is there any chance that if those activities, like in terms of preserving cash, managing liquidity, withdrawing headroom, and so on and so forth, is there any chance that those would have a negative ripple impact on the economy if been applied at a broader scale?
I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to be able to comment from a kind of impact on the economy. I think the actions that we're asking people to take are there to ensure businesses survive. And if businesses are surviving, surely that's positive and a good thing for the economy. So I think from a perspective of the actions that ourselves or any other advisor is telling you to take, these are all focused at ensuring survival of the business. And if a business continues to survive and employs people and continues to prosper, surely that's in the interest of any economy. So I think all the actions should really point in one direction: survival of business, and that should really impact positively the economy.
We hope so, and we expect so. I've raised the question, and with the back answer as well, that it's not going to have that negative impact. It's, as at the end of the day, will result in a positive for the whole community. A question from Dr. Yusuf, which I'm going to as well rephrase a little bit. So, if I got it right, Dr. Yusuf, so companies have put forecasts like in March, April, or May period. So by now, it's still uncertain, that the path for the way forward is still unclear. So which of those scenarios would be at this stage probably applicable, or is there any chance that companies would know now which scenario need to be applied, given that we still have a lot of uncertainties?
Yeah. So scenario planning and forecasting is not meant to be a rigid thing. You don't just do it once, particularly in times of uncertainty. In the times of certainty with a business, you might do a budget once a year and a business plan once a year, which you would update just before your year end, and then you know what you're working towards and you track against that. In times of uncertainty, you need to be more fluid and you need to be more flexible. So scenario planning and forecasting would need to be updated and iterated and reiterated on a monthly, maybe quarterly basis. Because today what we know, we did not know 3 months ago, and what we will know in 3 months' time with regards to COVID, which is unprecedented, we do not know today. Therefore, I would not rely on what's been in your forecast back in March or April. I would suggest that you refresh that forecast based on the facts today and based on how you've tracked over the last 3 months with regards to that forecast. This needs to be fluid until there's certainty around the direction and the impact of the pandemic on your business and on the economy. Today, it's still very much unclear. I mean, people are talking about second wave. Who knows? Will that impact the region here? Is it all sporadic in certain areas? For now, we're still very much in the midst of the pandemic, and therefore you need to be very flexible in your forecast.
I think I would just add very briefly to that. A lot of the time as business leaders, sometimes we don't want to keep doing things again and again. So something like a budget, traditionally you would do that once a year, and you may not feel that you should do that twice or 3 times or 4 times. But actually, given the current situation, you should use these business processes for what they are. These are tools to help employees, management, shareholders, lenders, etc., understand what's going on and plan for it. So if that means that for this 12-month period you do a budget twice or 3 times or 4 times, you shouldn't shy away from that, because it's the activity, not the number you get at the end, that helps prepare people for the changes.
Amazing answers, James. I would add to this, like, it's very obvious that during those times, it's expected that businesses need to be dynamic and pragmatic in responses to the advancements in the economy, and probably revisiting that, not only the cash flow forecast, the whole business plan. I would say looking for new business lines, addressing, as we mentioned during the presentation, addressing core versus non-core, critical versus non-critical. So yeah, that could be one of the main things that need to be considered right now. A question from Samir. So appreciate your views on supply chain finance using banks as a conduit.
Supply chain financing is an interesting one. It is, and it can be used in certain businesses. And I'm going to read into the question. I assume you mean using, for instance, your receivables as a potential means of getting additional facilities or factoring those receivables. So assuming that's the direction of the question, and please clarify if I've misunderstood that. That's to the person who's asking that question. There are banks and there are certain special situation funders that provide funding of, receivable financing or other types of, working capital financing. There is absolutely nothing wrong with using those type of facilities to improve the cash flow. For example, if you've got huge amounts of receivables because your working capital cycle is quite lengthy, there is absolutely no issue with using those receivables, assuming they are from blue chip or they're from credible customers, to then receive additional financing or improve or actually get earlier cash from your banks. There will be a cost associated with that, but I will go back to what I was saying. In today's environment, costs and profitability is not as important. I wouldn't say it's not important at all, but it's not as important of having liquidity in cash. So if there are facilities out there, if there are facility providers out there, if you've got the ability to do working capital financing or supply chain financing, I would recommend that you look into those, obviously within the context of the cost associated with it, and you take advantage of those. These type of facilities can actually be cheaper than going out and getting a new loan, because they are asset-based facilities, and they are they've got assets against the security against these facilities as assets, and therefore you should hopefully be able to get much better terms from an interest perspective and margin perspective than you would do on a normal loan. So absolutely look into those. And your bank, if it's not your bank, there are special funders of these type of facilities.
Thank you, Mo. I have a very interesting question from the Arabic session from Muhammad. So Muhammad is asking, I'm going to translate, do companies need to prepare in the future for in their budgets and have like an alternative or a buffer budget for similar situations? Is this like, probably the next pandemic wouldn't happen like, and God forbid, like in the next 10, 15 years. Should this be part of a routine or practice on a yearly basis that companies need to budget for it?
Let me take that. So I think a couple of things. In any budgeting and business planning, you should always have a line for contingency, always. But I don't think any budget in the world, any business with their budget in the world would have a sufficient enough buffer or contingency to factor in what's happened with regards to COVID-19. So whilst I think it is sensible to always have an element of a buffer and contingency, so that might be 5 or 10%, give or take, I don't think anyone could foresee what's happened. So yes, have contingency and buffers, but I don't think you should be excessive in that, because you do not know, or nobody knows what the future holds. And, things like, pandemics of this type of nature, no one can forecast.
Thank you, Mo. Another question as well from the Arabic session. I'm going to rephrase because it came in a series of questions as well from Fatima. So Fatima is asking, like, with the current situation of people getting back to work, I mean, the majority at 35% capacity, would scenario planning put in place, for example, those people not adhering to social distancing and safety and security measures and probably getting back to square one?
So I think to Fatima's question, I think that's more around practical steps by the business to ensure that people, are following social distancing and the government guidelines rather than actually scenario planning for it. For example, in my firm, our offices are open, but we've put a limit at the moment between 20 and 30% capacity. If you want to enter the office, you need to have registered beforehand to ensure that we don't breach that 30% capacity. Before you enter, your temperature's controlled and checked. Once you enter, you need to sanitize your hands. If you sit on a desk, there's a kind of a sign that says the desk has been sanitized. You sit there and you work on it. All desks are now at least 2 meters apart. When you finish working and you want to leave, you change the sign into a please clean my desk, so a cleaner comes and sanitizes it. So these are kind of simple practical steps and guidelines that the government has put in place that businesses should follow to avoid any sort of outbreak. So I don't think it's about scenario planning. I think it's more about businesses taking the practical steps to ensure that doesn't happen and minimize the risk.
That's great. Thank you, Mo. Another question from Muhammad as well. So, different Muhammad. What operational levers there are for me to manage my cash flow?
Kabir, do you want to take this one?
Yep, sure. So there's optimizing cash flow and there's managing cash flow. If we're talking about managing the cash flow by itself, I think it's around what we said earlier. Create your cash control room. So make sure that team has visibility of all cash flow forecasting in the business. They understand all the routes by which cash can go out of the business and all the routes that cash can come into the business. And if you have that as your starting point, I think then you can start making decisions. If we're talking about improving, so the levers to improve cash flow, again, I think take advantage of upcoming contract renewals, renegotiate those as rapidly and effectively as you can. Like I said before, pause all of the non-critical projects and activities. Think about your usage of freelancers and contractors versus permanent staff. And you can also do more creative things like offering people paid holiday, for example, at a reduced rate. So there are many, many levers you can use across your supply chain, your third party, your people, and your other costs. I think there's a lot you can access, some of which we've covered in this presentation.
Thank you, Kabir. We still have 1 minute. I'm going to have one more question, very quick question. So, Mo, you've mentioned throughout the presentation, and it was very explicitly, and I would say explained in detail, but probably it would be good as well to summarize and how do I best approach my bank for a discussion on further deferral of my upcoming loan payments?
Exactly, and that's a very good question and a key question, a good one to finish off the session on, Sultan. I think, as I said, banks have been very flexible, and I've got banking clients speaking to most of the prominent banks in the UAE, and they've been extremely flexible because they've been asked to be flexible first of all by the regulator and the central bank, and also they've been provided with the tools to be flexible by way of the government stimulus packages. That was back in March and June, and throughout the you had a payment in March and the payment in June quarter end. I think flexibility was there. Where the banks are today, and I'm speaking to them on a regular basis, is that the next deferral, if people are asking for, be it end of September deferral or end of the year, is not going to be an easy conversation. for businesses, because they are expecting businesses to have now, over the last 6 months, have really understood the impact to the extent possible, have actually come up with the scenarios, and go to them with a bit more information than actually, please defer, I don't know what's happening to my business. So to answer your question, what do you need to do to prepare? As I said, I'll summarize it into 3 buckets, very important. Bucket number 1, information and transparency. Ensure that you have got in place your cash flow forecasts, both short-term, 3 to 6 months, and business plan, long-term, FY21 onwards, and scenario planning. So you've done that, you've stress tested it, you've got it ready. So that's information. So bucket 1 is information, quality information, latest information, updated, agile, flexible. Bucket number 2, what actions have you taken as the management team in order to improve that? So you have the base case, and then you say, well, I've done the following. So Kabir touched on some of these. I've told people to go on unpaid leave for a period of 1 month, some of my staff. I've stopped my investment in the following areas because I don't think they're cash generative. I have reduced costs by doing the following. I've gone out there and spoken to my suppliers and reduced my working capital cycle. All of these actions have resulted in an improvement from my base case to a better position. And the third bucket is, what are the shareholders and your sponsors doing? So I've got the numbers, I've done the following as a business, and my shareholders are willing to support me by providing the following guarantees, providing some more liquidity, some equity injection. All of those actions, it's still not good enough because I still need deferral, because me taking all of the actions that I've just outlined still doesn't result in sufficient liquidity for me to pay you guys. Now we need to talk about a deferral. If you went with that level of preparation, and sometimes depending on the size of the business, you might need some support in coming up with that preparation. But if you went with that level of preparation, it is likely that you're going to get a more positive response than a no once you request a deferral or a cure on your problem.
Thank you, Mo. And I want to add to the last point which you've mentioned, like getting the right support. I know like the situation is probably stressing on cash, but coming back from the consultancy, and I know like it's the time to engage with advisors. It's the time to engage with teams who have extensive experience and broad access to different markets. So it might cost you a bit probably, but for the future it's going to be to your benefit. So seek advice from experts as you can. Any last words, Mo, before I close?
No, thank you to the Chamber for allowing my firm, myself, Kabir, and the team to be part of it. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Kabir, thank you, and thank you, Mo. Thanks for the team. Appreciate your time today. Thanks for all the audience. Hope you find this session insightful. We're running a poll at the end of this, so if you can spend 1 minute or so to just go through it. I'll be seeing you again on Tuesday with a very interesting session with Deloitte on fast-track M&A, responding to COVID-19. Until then, stay safe. Thank you, gents. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.